Warframe will undergo yet another huge change soon, and the developers are looking to simplify how damage works against enemies in the game. They are most concerned with those considered by many players as trash statuses such as Blast and Cold. But before we get into details, let me ask you this. Is Cold status really that bad? And what kind of change should the Blast status receive to make it good? Let me know in the comment section below, and let's try to discuss your answers later. For now, let me give you all the details and the effects of the changes to Warframe. By the way, if you are not subscribed to the channel, then I humbly ask that you do it now so you will be updated on our latest gaming content. Also, don't forget to like and share this video to help us please the YouTube algorithm. Thank you so much for all your support, and now let's get into the video. The first thing that I want to discuss here is how Digital Extremes is planning to simplify the damage resistance of enemies in the game. We have 13 unique damage types in the game, and you can't say that one damage type will work for all variants of a specific faction. Do take note that we don't have shield values alone, but we also have specific shield types like proto shields that need a specific damage type to easily kill a target. A good example is armor, and no single damage type can kill them all, as there are enemies that have ferrite armor, and there are also variants that have alloy armor. What will happen is that Digital Extremes will simplify these damage resistances to armor, shield, and health. Basically, all flesh types become health, alloy, or ferrite becomes just armor, and the difference between proto shields fold into shields. Instead of 13 enemy health types to juggle, Digital Extremes are planning to work with 3 to better develop faction resistances and weaknesses and create a more approachable system. So the developers' focus shifts toward faction-specific resistances. They propose tailored resistances for each faction, which will universally impact that particular group of enemies. Consequently, the star chart will display recommended faction resistance for each planet. In alignment with the current faction, weaknesses and resistances will be listed to suggest optimal damage options against any faction or location. In scenarios where multiple factions coexist on a planet, such as the Murmur or infested on Deimos, each faction will possess its own set of resistances and weaknesses, which will be communicated clearly. Moreover, irrespective of specialized resistances, status effects will remain consistent even if the enemy shows resistance to a particular damage type. For instance, if enemies have shields but the note indicates resistance to magnetic damage, the status effect will still impede the effectiveness of shields. Additionally, damage resistances will persist regardless of an enemy's armor or shields being depleted, as they are determined per faction, thereby continuing to impact their health type equally. Furthermore, discussions also touch upon variations in resistance depending on specific locations. For instance, regular Grenier may exhibit different resistances and weaknesses compared to Kuvi Grenier. A prime illustration is when the Grenier on Earth are susceptible to corrosive and heat damage. Utilizing corrosive and heat will result in increased damage against all enemies belonging to that faction. Subsequently, chosen status effects will operate independently as anticipated, allowing for potential swaps like using viral instead of corrosive or bringing viral via a secondary weapon. The status effect of viral will then significantly impact the weapon with corrosive or heat against all present adversaries. Consequently, rather than having your status effectiveness limited to a few enemies and neutral to others, your selected damage type becomes more universally effective while still accommodating your preferred status effects. This streamlined approach reduces the complexity of juggling between 13 unseen health or defensive types, facilitating easier faction-specific builds through 2 statuses and your preferred playstyle. They also mentioned in the dev stream that they'll be dealing with enemy armor, and the idea is to level the armor scaling of enemies to the point that corrosive stacking will matter, instead of just using abilities such as Pillage for full armor strip to get the highest damage possible. To be honest, I don't have a problem with armor in the game since I have almost all the needed stuff to counter the highly armored enemies in Warframe. However, this might prove beneficial to those players who are just progressing through the star chart or beginning the steel path levels in the game. The idea is to give enemies armor caps, so variants like Grenier units will not be as bullet sponge as what we have right now. Like I have said, I don't mind the tankiness of enemies right now, and it's weird for me to see that Digital Extremes are planning to even make it easier to do more damage to their enemies. But then they got some sort of safe wall, because during the nerf of enemy armor, they will also buff the health values to the point that it's the right amount of buff to make up for the lost armor tankiness. Aside from armor, they will be reworking enemy shields to the extent wherein enemies that are close to level 100 will have better shield regeneration. They are bumping the Corpus shield regeneration, as what Pablo said during the dev stream. Shield feels unimpactful since you can just use the usual viral and slash damage to kill Corpus or corrupted enemies. This is true, and while viral gets a negative damage bonus against shield, it doesn't matter since in reality, enemies with shields just die fast even if you have a viral build. This change addresses this issue, and expect that magnetic will come in handy against high shield enemies since it will disrupt that regeneration process. The only thing that wasn't given a huge emphasis is that will the developer address toxin damage, because if not, then then no matter how high the shield regeneration of enemies is, they will still be killed by toxin damage since it bypasses this damage resistance. This means that magnetic won't be needed at all, and the fact is there are warframes in the game that can trigger toxin damage constantly, which makes them more meta when these changes are implemented in the game. Before we head to warframes that will get buffed indirectly, I would also want to discuss the other elements that were given importance in the recent dev stream. First of all, cold will have a new effect where you freeze your enemies upon reaching the new cold stack maximum. Cold has a new stack cap, and it will freeze enemies for a few seconds after inflicting full cold stacks. While frozen, critical damage is greatly increased and they do not regenerate shields, and the freeze effect may synergize with other status effects such as bleed, allowing you to deal massive damage to targets. However, special units like acolytes, bosses, and more cannot be completely frozen. They'll also be immune to the frozen inflicted critical damage increase naturally, but they will still get the slow effect, but with limitations to the number of stacks. Also, they will be making gas more visible in the game. Digital Extremes did not mention any buffs for this damage type because honestly, gas is very potent when used correctly. If you have something that can group enemies, then full defense strip, then gas will be super busted in the game. Magnetic won't be receiving any buff, but the developer seems to hope that the changes to shield regeneration will make this damage type more popular. And lastly, blast damage will be reworked. While there are no specific details yet, Pablo promised that the blast damage will be blasting after the rework. The current state of blast in Warframe is that it's a sort of survivability since it lowers the accuracy of enemies. While it's a good layer of survivability, but it's really a weak feature for something that is named blast damage. I'm hoping that Digital Extremes will somehow make blast a damage type that can deal damage to multiple enemies. It should be related to something that is exploding and not something that will get negative accuracy debuff. Now, after the status rework, 3 Warframes will receive another bump in power, namely Frost, LAVOS, and Saren. Frost will benefit the most with the cold status changes, and I'm interested how Digital Extremes will balance the ability of Frost since he got an ability that freezes target, and I'm interested of what happens when he also have a full stack of cold procs into the enemies. This will be very interesting, but it would be nice to see Frost getting more power in the future. However, Frost won't be the best Warframe for the cold status changes, as currently Warframe players do rely on cold procs using their companions to slow down special enemies, and I think it won't do anything new against enemies like Demolist units, and they will just get slowed by cold status, but the fact is, the cold proc will freeze trash mobs, which you can use your Sentinel to proc the status to multiple enemies fast and easily. In terms of Saren and LAVOS, these Warframes will be super busted as they will take full advantage of the enemy armor changes. They will be more lethal and famous in my opinion since they have some build options to proc the best enemies to deal maximum damage. Saren will be super busted with her Spore's corrosive stacking and Toxic Lash's toxin status, not to mention that you can also use Viral with either her 4th ability or Subsume Nourish into the Warframe. Also, you will have the option to either fully strip or keep the 10 corrosive stack for higher damage to armor. If you pair it with 2 Emerald Archon Shard, then you get 14 corrosive stacks to fully strip all armor, making enemies more vulnerable to Viral, Toxin, and any damage types you have in your weapons. If not, then enemies will die with the high damage from corrosive, then you will also have Viral and other elements to kill them. And also, shielded enemies will still pose no threat to Saren, as she will have her Spore's ability to bypass their shields. The same can be said with LAVOS, but the Warframe will be more lethal with his Valence formation augment, as it also has an elemental damage increase. You can form multiple elements with LAVOS, and you can do the same insane damage to enemies after the status and damage resistance rework. The best part is that it seems like multiple element combo will be more potent, as you can inflict more damage on the target compared to just the usual Viral and slash combo. Honestly, this is one of the best things I am looking forward to in the future of Warframe, and I can't wait to try it out myself. Galvanized status or condition overload setup will be more busted than ever after this update, and I can't wait what combos I can use when this status and damage resistance rework will arrive. So that's all the things you need to know about this upcoming rework, and it will arrive in the Jade Shadows update. Before that, we will be getting a new Night Wave, along with Kuva Sobek and Tenet Glaxion. This will be available May 15th, but before this update, we will finally get our hands on Protea Prime in May 1st. There are tons of new content coming to Warframe, and I'm really excited for them all. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you again in our next video. Squad Leader, signing off.